moderator for our next panel, Zachary Lee.
Hello everyone, great to see y'all here. Welcome to this space. Hope y'all's lungs have adjusted well to everything. I feel like I'm from the Midwest, from Chicago, so anytime there's elevation, I'm just kind of like, this is not what I'm used to or ready for. But yeah, we're here for amplifying new narratives, how press, studios, and talent elevate the industry. So I'm Zachary Lee. I'm a freelance film critic and journalist based in Chicago. I'm here at the festival with Roger Ebert, Letterboxd, Fangoria, National Catholic Reporter, and Joy Sauce. So a couple different places, kind of different verticals and writing everywhere. But yeah, we're so glad you're here for this Rotten Tomatoes Lab Critics Edition. This talk is part of that. The lab is an ongoing career development resource series for critics and journalists, including meaningful advice that you'll hear today. So enough about me though. I'm really excited because we have an amazing just group and row of panelists who will be sharing and talking all about, on this subject, how we can kind of collaborate and work together. I feel like the theme of community has been really a through line for everything. So first I'd like to introduce Therese Lacson. She's a television features editor who has been with Collider since 2020. She started in this business over 10 years ago, working primarily as an interviewer and critic for the Beats and Nerd Files. At Collider, she works closely with the features team to support the writers and also ideates and develops content daily. She has covered major industry events, including the Cannes Film Festival, Sundance Film Festival, and San Diego Comic-Con. So welcome, Therese. Next up, we have Siddhant Adlakha, a film critic for various outlets, including the New York Times, The Guardian, Time Magazine, Variety, and New York Magazine. He won the award for Best Film Critic at the 16th National Arts and Entertainment Journalism Awards, and has been awarded both Best Film Criticism and Best TV Criticism at the Southern California Journalism Awards. And his video work, which is great if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, was one of his video essays was voted among the best for 2022 by Sight and Sound magazine. So welcome to Siddhant. It's great to have you here. And then next up we have Nicole Balgemino Kim. She's the Vice President of Communications and Events at Disney Entertainment Television, where she leads strategy and execution of high-profile events and special projects. Previously, Nicole led publicity and campaigns for critically acclaimed and award-winning series, so many, Peabody Award-winning remake of The Wonder Years, final seasons of Blackish, and its numerous spin-offs as well. She was born in Manila and grew up between Los Angeles and the Philippines, and graduated from the University of San Diego with a bachelor's degree in communications in the Spanish language. Welcome. And then last but not least, I want to welcome Rishi Rajani. He's the CEO of Lena Waithe's media company, Hillman Grad. He produced the Sundance award-winning films, The 40-Year-Old Version, personal favorite of mine, 1001, and Kokomo City, and executive produced the series The Chai, 20s, and Boomerang. His latest projects include Disney Plus's Chang Can Dunk and Being Mary Tyler Moore for HBO, which were both Emmy nominated. Rajani has been instrumental in securing partnership deals for Hillman Grad with companies such as Warner Bros. Television Group as well. And he originated the company's Rising Voices Director Fellowship with Indeed as well. So welcome. All right, so
sorry, let's hear for Zachary as well. Thank you for moderating.
Yeah, grateful to be with you all and to just, I'm here very much just with you guys as wanting to learn and hear from what all these guys have to say. So really looking forward to the conversation. So I was thinking we'll start like little inverted pyramid. I'll start kind of broad and then we'll kind of narrow in a little bit on specifics of the work you do. So firstly, I just love for you all to sort of touch on what you see the role of your work in the broader industry ecosystem. So would love to also hear about maybe what does a typical workday look like for you. I know that can depend on the season, but yeah, let's start with that. Whoever wants to go first with, the role of your work in the industry.
I'd love to quote a local film critic from Utah who I really admire, Scott Renshaw, who said that his role as a film critic is not to tell people what to watch, but to tell people how to watch. And so that's kind of my North Star as well, just kind of expanding the conversation on like how we watch and experience movies and art and how that ties into broader political and social trends. But there's a bit of recommendation involved too, because not everyone hears about every movie out there. As for a typical day, the advantage and disadvantage of being a freelancer in the gig economy is you get to set your own schedule. So it depends. Some days I have nothing going on. Some days I am answering emails in bed the moment I open my eyes. I'm sure some of you can relate. But yeah, it's usually dependent on, like you said, seasonality and waiting for other people's emails. That's a skill you have to learn. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you folks as well.
Well, I don't have a delightful quote to kick this off with. Unfortunately, I'm glad you went first. So I am primarily an editor. I would say my role in the industry, I really like to uplift voices, especially of our writers, and working with them to develop their voice and their tone. For me, a typical day is pretty standard. I wake up in bed and I go into a meeting immediately for our pitch meeting, and we go over pitches every morning of different feature articles. Then it just gets into work to editing things and answering emails and making sure everybody, kind of wrangling cats. Anybody who's a writer here, I've wrangled many of you. But yeah, it's like the same job, but also it's always different because every writer is different. So yeah, I enjoy it.
All right. It is so difficult to define the role of being a producer. I think I get asked the question all the time. And the truth is, it's everything. It's project management. It's like making sure a film is delivered on budget, on time, on schedule. It is also being like emotional punching bag, like hand to hold, like notes giver, basketball rebounder, like basically anything that the creative team that I'm working with needs in the moment, and that differs from artist to artist, creative to creative. I think that's one of the joys of my job, is I get to work with people who I think are so talented and who I'm fans of, and get to help them bring their next project into reality, and basically doing whatever I can, whether that is making sure the script is in great shape, or finding the money, finding the financing, or bringing it to the Sundance Film Festival and helping it find distribution. All of those elements are part of my job. My day-to-day super varies based on whether I'm on set or I'm in the office. I also run the company Hillman Grad, which is the company that I have with the amazing creative Lena Wade. And we have a full team of people, and so I can be doing everything from doing a one-on-one with one of our junior executives, or like being on set, like wondering why I decided to join this movie in the first place. So, it's a lot.
I have a quote, actually. One of our leaders often says that our role is to be the best storytellers for our storytellers. By the time it gets to the marketing and publicity campaign, that that's really our function. So it's really just about, discovering these amazing stories that we have the opportunity to share with the rest of the world, and amplifying those and breaking through, this really dense and competitive landscape, and just, making sure it's amplified to the right press, influencers, communities. So that's, our function. And on the day-to-day, I think it's similar to all these guys. There's no such thing. There's sometimes 36 hours where you're running a marathon, and then sometimes 8-hour days where you're just sitting at your desk all day, and your aura ring's get up, girl, and stand up. But that's, it varies.
For sure. No, I feel like it was just great to get a sense, I think, in the room of what's the, a day can look very different. I'm sure, being here at the festival, it's also kind of the demands and the responsibilities and obligations also shift. I think a through line that I'm kind of seeing is all of you, even though you have great work you're doing solo, this can't really be done without community or without a team. I think, Therese and Dawn, you're talking a lot about your writing, but you're relying on people from emails to respond, or assigning people work, and obviously with producing and doing publicity, it's a big team effort. And so I'd love to hear more about what it's like to facilitate networking and communications, and maybe specifically in the context of this festival. And I think what's neat is, I feel here you can meet people everywhere, like whether you're standing in line for a screening or at an after party or a reception. I think one anecdote I'll share quickly is, I think I was at a premiere at the Eccles Theater last year, and I was talking to a woman in line, and I found out later she was connected to Glenn Powell's team for, I don't know exactly in what capacity, but she started telling me spoilers about Twisters, which I don't think I didn't necessarily ask for. I was like, this is still a cool connection, that we can like, talk, but you never know what you're gonna get, when you're talking with people in line. So would love to just hear, what's it like facilitating those connections, maybe specifically at a festival, but in other areas of your work too. So
Well, this is probably not the answer you wanted, but I know everybody talks about Sundance as a networking opportunity. I find that to be kind of empty sometimes if you're just talking to somebody trying to get something. I find that like the best connections I've made at Sundance have been through genuine conversation and talking with somebody and finding out later like, oh, like you happen to write for this magazine or you happen to work for this company, and that to me feels far more genuine, and I have a longer lasting relationship with that person, as opposed to like, a networking event where you're like keeping an eye out like, oh, I recognize that person, I'm gonna go talk to them. But I find like forming a genuine connection to be the most long lasting way of making a very good connection. So
I agree with that fully, because I think that the best way, especially here at Sundance, is to full send, like lean in, fully commit to the relationships and the people, and we're all here because we have a vested and like an interest in rich storytelling and great stories. That's why we love Sundance. And so I think, a shared interest and a common interest is a great starting point, but to Therese's point, like a profound connection is like go beyond that. Like what can we do, not just for each other right now, but how can we continue to build this relationship? I mean, I have people similar to Zachary that I met at Sundance in 2013, don't do the math, that I still talk to, and I've seen at this festival this year, so.
I love this festival, and I feel like I have had the opportunity and experience of coming here as a younger person and not knowing anybody and sleeping on floors and trying to sneak into screenings and like begging and pleading my way into like every single venue on this main street to, coming here in 2023 with 1001, which, was lucky enough to win the grand jury prize of the festival. And I feel like I've had such a spectrum and range of experiences here. But I think like when it comes to networking connection, I kind of feel the same way that I feel about whether you're at Sundance or you're at like a Hollywood party or you're in New York at theater, in that I feel like people have this sort of desire to connect with people that they view as already being successful, right? The people that are at the top of the pyramid in some way, shape, or form, and the people that have produced the movie. And instead, I think, the most valuable relationships and connections that I've made are with peers who are at my same level. So when I first came to Sundance, like other assistants, and people I was sleeping on the floor next to, it's those, and those people have grown to become my network. They are the people. There's a guy named Chaz Lembier who I met here, who ended up buying the film Shank and Dunk that I made with Disney Plus. We met, we were assistants. It's those, that's your support system. Those are your allies. Those are the people that you're going to grow in the business with, in the industry with. If you're here and you're trying to be a producer, like, you're not trying to go make the person that wins the grand jury prize of the movie. You're trying to meet the person that has maybe a short film here or is aspiring to have a short film here. And I think that to me is like the most genuine connections that this festival can give you, that doesn't feel very like clout grabby.
Yeah, I think for those of us on the freelance writing side of things, it's sort of vital to make these connections, whether it's with editors, I'm gonna give you my card after, or if it's with fellow freelancers and just exchanging your own information or contacts of people you can get in touch with to get more work. And of course, there's always going to be that slight voice at the back of your head telling you is this just a transactional relationship? But to a degree, that's the nature of networking. It is transactional in a way, but a transaction is also mutually beneficial, and I think you can sort of liken it to dating in a way, where it's like it works best if you both know you're on the same terms, you talk about what you both want. And I think for me, that's a vital part of going to festivals, is meeting people who you can't help but in some sense see as your competition, because we are in a very ruthless landscape where we're kind of choked for jobs and opportunities. But at the same time, if you help each other enough, like all of you will end up rising together. So that's how I go about it.
I will just say that, like, in the industry, the people that I've had the longest relationships with are typically my peers who are also people of color and women. Like, when I first started out, every person that I worked with was white, and most of them were old men because I was in Phoenix, and the critics there are old men. And I found like the most long-lasting relationships were with people who looked like me or were in the same struggle as I was. So I think as long as you have to find your people in that room, and that may not be the VP of something. Like, it may be somebody who's on the rise with you. So
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because another thing I wanted to share was I'm grateful to be here with the Press Inclusion Initiative as well. I don't know if there's any press inclusion folks in the audience right now who are attending, but I know that's just been so instrumental, just to have a WhatsApp group to people to know. And I know I've not been, this is my public confession, I know I've not been responding much in that group, I'm sorry, but it's been great to see the connections that have been happening, and let's meet up before the screening or doing that. So I love what you have all shared about people who you're rising up together with you, and what it's like to facilitate that. Really quick, just to touch on it really quick, practically, what would you, what are, for people who are navigating that for the first time, what do facilitating those maybe initial conversations, look like? And maybe it depends on the context where you're at. Obviously here, where we're all gathered for something, there's maybe a little more precedent versus I don't know, standing in line somewhere. But yeah, however people want to have advice on that, yeah.
So I know a lot of us that do the kind of jobs that we do behind computers most of the time can be a bit socially awkward. And it does take time to kind of build up the confidence to just go up to someone whose work you're familiar with, someone who you've seen on a particular website, in a magazine, or even on Twitter, and just start talking to them. Introduce yourself without the awkwardness of oh, I know you, you don't know me, blah, blah, blah. Because I think the people who have been around long enough and have done this long enough are also used to having these kinds of conversations. And sometimes those of us who are newcomers, I don't know if I'm a newcomer anymore necessarily, but when I was, we kind of forget that, these people whose work we see and look up to, whatever it is, or aspire to, they're also just, regular people. And they appreciate, conversation. And I think that's been my way of going about it, just trying to be as casual about it as possible, which I know is easier said than done, but that's what's helped me.
I actually have something to say to that effect. If you're at a party, I find talking about the food and the drink as an icebreaker is very, very helpful. I've used that probably every single time I'm at a party. So you could just be oh, this is good, right? And then, get into it.
Yeah. Also, you're at Sundance. Talk about the movies. Have opinions, have a point of view, go see things, and then that's going to give you everything to talk about with kind of random people.
But be careful, that person doesn't work on the project that they're doing. If you hate the movie, maybe don't. Maybe check.
That was going to be my advice. Just be aware of who, word travels far, so be mindful of maybe the space that you're in. But yeah, Nicole, I'm thinking about the publicity side of all of this too, and just thinking, journalists in the room, journalists in the panel too, of what it's like to, connecting with publicists, what facilitating that relationship is like. I'm thinking about part of the Press Inclusion Initiative also as a journalist, that relationship maybe between publicists and journalists and talent, studio, and all to kind of jumble together, and what are the rules of engagement in a way. So on your end, as you're kind of thinking through some of that work and projects we'll be here, and so now Therese is on the other side of that.
I think, frankly, project aside, I think it's just important to invest in the relationship and each other early on. I mean, the people who I was pitching when I was at Disney Channel on Girl Meets World became the people that I was pitching for TV features on Freeform, and The Bold Type became the people who wrote amazing finale features for Blackish. To your point of the people who rise the ranks with you are the people who are going to be your connections for a long time. And I remember working with these people, and be nice to everybody because you don't know where they're going to end up, and they may end up your boss always. But I think that's the most important thing, is just get in the door early, but be nice to everyone. An intern who worked with me on a story at Freeform is now a TV writer that we work with daily. So I think getting in the door early and fostering those relationships, there's never a writer position that is too small to pitch a publicist, because a publicist needs the story. So it doesn't matter if you're a freelance, doesn't matter if you're an intern, if you have a great idea, if you like the project, or if you're passionate about it, we have the same goal. We want to amplify that story.
That's great. No, thank you. I feel like you said, maintaining those relationships, being aware of the people who are, in a space. And they'll show up later too if you're kind of staying in the same place. Want to continue to speak to you, and also Rishi as well, since dealing with the publicity producing side of work. So, Nicole, right in your bio, you've helped kind of create, do these campaigns for all these wonderful, projects. And I was thinking about, let's take something like Blackish, for instance, and say you have a project like this that, it is maybe speaking to and is very much telling the story of a particular group, ethnic group, identity, or other marginalized group. How are you thinking through publicity for that? How are you thinking about the role of people like Therese or Siddhant and critics and journalists, and maybe amplifying the story when you have a passion for it and you really like it? What's that like?
I think what I always remind myself is I just want to do right by the story. It's not my story that's being disseminated. It's my story to amplify. And I think what we have the opportunity to do, especially with writers and critics, is to tell the story beyond what they just see at face value, and we have the opportunity to build a deeper affinity, so that it's opening the doors to tell below the line stories of Michelle Cole, for example, who was nominated for every season of Blackish as costume designer. She works on almost all of the best Black-led shows in Hollywood, and we got to tell her story over and over again, and we got to feature her in an entire FYC campaign. It's about finding a little bit deeper and digging a little bit deeper. But I think the biggest thing is always just wanting to make sure to get it right. You don't want to do anything that's performative. You don't want to be hey, Asian writer, here's this Asian show. That's not the thing to do.
That's right.
But I've worked on really incredible shows that have always had a sense of community behind it, and what I've always felt if I'm watching a show, and if I want to be a fan of the show, where am I going to see it? Where am I going to personally hear about it? And so it's always kind of just finding those grassroots approaches.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to toss that question to you, Rishi, in many ways, because want to keep shouting out 40-year-old version just because I love the project so much. But how are you thinking about the role of critics and journalists in that too, and relationship there?
Yeah, I mean, we at Hillman Grad, and even with 40-year-old versions being a great example of it, critics and journalists have been the reason that those movies made it to audiences. 40-year-old version came to the festival with no distribution in place. We were with a new financier. We'd scrapped that film together for $2 in New York, and just were trying everything in our power to make this thing happen. It's a project that had been passed on for 7 years in a row. We brought it to the festival, and I'll never forget the premiere of that, and how wonderfully receptive the audiences are. But of course, that's one theater in Park City during Sundance. And if we didn't have critics and journalists who were able to amplify that and talk about the response in the room, talk about how impactful it was to them personally to blast out a story, we probably wouldn't have had the amazing, multiple offers of distribution for the film. We wouldn't have had the ongoing campaign and support that we had. People wouldn't have known about it. And so I feel very grateful for the kind of ecosystem that exists, especially now that there are much more critics from a lot of diverse backgrounds. I think the challenge that I see still with both publicity campaigns, studio campaigns, and especially for the kind of work that I do, which is generally people of color driven, is I think there's this tendency to say, this film with a Black cast is for Black audiences, or this film with an Asian cast is for Asian audiences. And that's just a thing I want to see shifted as we talk about campaigns, and as we talk about sort of the way that we actually articulate about the film and why people should see it. I know it's a battle that still needs to be fought, and but I think we're moving there. I mean, the truth is, we've all been watching a lot of movies about white people doing everything for a very long time, regardless of what our background is. And I want to see that same kind of respect given to movies starring about people of color as well.
Totally.
one thing I'd like to add too, especially about the critics and to your point about finding an audience, I've worked on series that, you know, have gotten a certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, there's your plug, and, you know, had a great critic review but didn't find its audience. And then that same show won a Peabody and then it found its audience. So I think, like, as much as it is a, you know, very congested space, like, people are still listening, the audience is still resonating with the advice and the recommendations that you and your writers have. So I think that's an important part, is, like, to your point, we have the opportunity to, like, really galvanize a community further. If we can't get it through that first blush of, like, you know, just the first instinct of, like, this is a A-list star-studded show, like, it's about telling those deeper stories and getting more people invested.
Definitely. Yeah, I love what I'm kind of hearing from both of you is, like, there's a posture of invitation that you're both taking with your projects. Like what you were saying, Rishi, like, yes, this is a Black story, you know, we want Black audiences to maybe see this, but the scope of this can be expanded beyond. We want to invite people in, and I feel like taking that kind of tone and posture probably does, it makes people more excited, maybe curious about wanting to kind of get into projects too.
Yeah, it's like, this is a great film that happens to star people from this background versus this is an Asian movie or this is a Black movie. I think it's just the rhetoric changed.
Totally, yeah. I'm thinking now, throwing it back to maybe the critics and writers side of things. As a freelancer, I was just talking with a friend and colleague yesterday just about the freelance grind. I feel like already it's January, but I'm like, oh, I gotta start thinking about March stories, like what I should be doing. And I'm like, this can be tough, you know, to, like, always be thinking about it. And there's so many projects, like, even here at Sundance, I'm sure it's hard to, you know, want to try to catch everything, but it's difficult. So, you know, Therese and Siddhant, like, how are you practicing discernment of what it looks like what you want to cover, or, you know, yeah, just thinking through with your limited time, how you're kind of spending that on this theme of amplifying stories too, and where it wants to go.
I'm going to have to contradict my opening quote a little bit. There is actually an element of recommendation because of the way, you know, the world has changed. There's constant access to information online, but with the death of newspapers, there's not a convenient place for people to just see what's playing. People hear about movies less and less, and so that's where our function as critics also can come in terms of spreading the word about what's out there, and it was also a time when I believed that nobody really reads critics anymore, and but then the more I worked and the more, like, big outlets I worked for, the more I was able to see a sort of tangible impact of what I was doing in terms of elevating voices that need it, elevating the kinds of movies that don't normally get seen, and to directly address your question, like, I'm lucky enough that I write for enough different kinds of outlets that like to cover enough different things that I can dedicate my time to, like, you know, here's the star-studded pop culture-y one, here's the underground one that no one's writing about or talking about. And I think the more that critics stay engaged with, you know, the political evolutions of art and, you know, society at large, the more we'll have the ability to be more discerning about what we should be writing about and covering. And of course, that's going to be different for everyone, but just as an example, we're moving into, you know, a new presidential term, and we're already starting to see shifts in what, you know, big studios are willing to put out there or are not willing to put out there. And, you know, no disrespect to anyone who, you know, works for any of these organizations. We're all ultimately at the mercy of all these conglomerates. But, you know, places now deciding, okay, you know, we've had enough of trans stories, we've had enough of environmental stories. Then if that stuff is not being talked about in the mainstream anymore, if the studios have decided actually it's not profitable when, you know, so-and-so is in power, then that's on us to say, no, this work is still out there, it's valuable, it's entertaining, those two things don't need to be mutually exclusive. And then it becomes on us to, like, you know, push for, like, hey, this is why we should cover this as well. Even though, you know, it may not always be the thing that gets the most clicks, but you never know which editor is going to say yes to what. So we got to take our chances and be like, no, nobody's talking about this, but it could be valuable to talk about.
Yeah, I think especially when it comes to events like Sundance, my goal is always to amplify. I always have like a niche that I like to exist in. Like, yes, of course, I want to watch all of the big movies, but specifically as a person who is Chinese American, I really do focus on those, and I try to amplify those voices because I am a part of that community, and I do find it to be important and to be honest with the community as well. I have this recurring nightmare where I hate something and I write a bad review and the director never directs again, and I don't want to be that person. But I think it's important to have a voice in the community that isn't always just saying positive things, because I think that can seem like you're pandering. And when there's something that I don't like or something that I feel like I need to be critical of, I think it's important to be fair and to be kind, but to be critical as well, because that's what we're here to do. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think, especially at these events with independent films, it's really important when you find something that you like, it's important to, there's a way to pitch it to your editor where you're like, this could be the next big thing. Like, you don't understand. Maybe the film isn't perfect, but maybe a performance is really good, or the director has a great vision. I think you have to highlight those things. Like, that's kind of why we're all here, right? So we're not, I mean, no disrespect to Disney or Marvel, but these are not Marvel movies. They're not getting the type of publicity that those types of movies are getting, so they deserve our attention.
Yeah, that's right.
I just really appreciate that you said that, because I think as filmmakers too, like, we don't want like a DEI handout on our critics review. We want to be, given again that same level of respect, that same level of criticism, that same level of thought and intensity when it comes, and we want something to be great, like in that way too. So I love that that's kind of the lens that you're looking at even too when it comes to supporting our communities.
Definitely, yeah, like just continuing to have like the same kind of critical lens and wanting to hold it to a certain standard too. Want to be mindful of our time as well. So whoever wants to speak to these, I want to try to wrap these questions up into two, because I'm thinking a lot about, we talk about seasonality of the industry, and I feel like I remember when I was, still freelancing, people were telling me, like, if you're trying to get stuff placed in writing for May, good luck, because that is Cannes. And everyone's, all outlets probably are thinking, having their budget aligned for that. So whoever wants to speak to thinking through seasonality of the industry, how that affects your, we're in awards season right now, it's Sundance right now, things like that. And then also maybe share resources that have been really helpful and, to this your work as well, whether it's like talks, shout out to RT Critics Lab for providing talks like this. But yeah, where do we want to go?
So just as an editor, I can give you guys advice if you are writers out there pitching and you're like, oh, I don't cover Sundance, or I don't have enough money to go to Cannes, which is, nobody has enough money to go there. Just remember that like evergreen stories are always relevant. There's, if there's a movie, if you're not into movies and you like television, which I don't think anybody here is not into movies, but you can, there's always an avenue for you to take, and if there's specific outlets that you're trying to pitch to, look at their writing, read their most prolific writers and see what they're looking for. There's always an avenue in. It isn't just about seasonality. Evergreen is very important as well.
And I was just going to add that, yeah, there is a seasonality to certain kinds of stories, the festivals, interviews, awards, but if you're planning to work year-round as a critic, there's always something coming out, always a new movie, always a new show. So you sometimes have to go digging and then be the bridge between audiences and films sometimes and publicists of course are valuable for that as well. But I was just in touch with a Nepali film that is opening in the US in March but doesn't have a publicist. So then that makes my role a little more complicated, because sure, I can put this person in touch with a publicist, but I also have to write stories in a way that will interest people beyond what they normally would be. And so there's always something to find to write about. And like you said, there are evergreen stories, whether it's, anniversary pieces, or streaming, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you could speak to that more.
No, streaming is so important. Like, there's always something coming out, and if it's somebody's in it, you can always tie it to something else. If this actor has done some random movie or show from the 90s, you could tie that together and make that into an article that's relevant to today. It's really about seeing things from a new point of view and not just from the same point of view that everybody's looking at it at.
Also look up what's streaming on Apple TV Plus. No one has any idea. I don't have any idea. I found out that Harrison Ford has been on a show for like 8 seasons or something.
It's a great show.
I just made that up. Is he really on a...
Shrinking.
Oh, all right.
To my point, yeah.
I think to the streaming point, it's a perfect example. Audiences are finding new shows at any given point. I mean, my entire FYP on TikTok is Smallville right now, and I don't know why. I've never seen it, and I don't like Superman. But I'm scrolling and I just keep seeing it, and like to your point, like people are just finding old shows or there's no such thing. I think the evergreen piece is really important. Like people can discover new shows. I mean, look at like Netflix for example, and any other streamer that has like a show that's from 2016 that is like in their top 10. So I think that's a really interesting point.
We use that to come up with pitches. Top 10 lists, very important. And Smallville's probably new to one of those streamers, and that's probably why everybody's talking about it. Probably Hulu, I think. I don't know.
I should have that.
So maybe not Hulu.
I think it's also worth talking about seasonality a little bit in like the larger context of Hollywood right now, because I think if we're going to be honest about it, Hollywood feels really bleak in this moment. You know, we had a pandemic, double strikes, contraction of the business, streamers not spending as much, and now literal Hollywood burning down, which has been awful. And I got kind of, in my own way, like frustrated and depressed by the state of the business and feeling like I couldn't get a movie like The 40-Year-Old Virgin made in 2024, which is really sad. But then I watched a really awesome documentary series that Justin Simien did called Hollywood Black. And what I learned from that series in a way that made me feel a little bit better about the state of our business and the industry is that it's just how seasonal and how cyclical everything is in our business. And what that series kind of reminded us is that Hollywood gets very excited about people of color and innovative ideas, and then we get to a point where some of those areas are very explored, people start making less money, the business people get more involved, and people pull back. And then it comes down to Black filmmakers, people of color filmmakers, to go off and go work outside of the system. Make movies that can get into Sundance, do something innovative and bold and distinct and different, and then be the films that everyone's paying attention to. Then Hollywood realizes that, and everyone's like, oh wow, what are you guys doing over there? That looks really cool. And they start kind of putting us back into the system again. And so I know that we may not be in like the easiest moment in the season in Hollywood right now, but I think for all the filmmakers out here, for all the writers, for all the artists, for all the producers, for all the critics and publicists, and everyone who is involved in our business, like we're just at that part of the cycle, and it's going to get better, and we are going to get to that point. We just have to keep innovating and keep making art.
Thank you for that word. I feel like that's a great benediction closing word for this time, but we're just out of time. Can we please give a round of applause for Nicole? Thank you all for joining us for this conversation. A huge thank you to our partners Goldhouse and NBC who launched the Rotten Tomatoes Lab Critics Edition is an ongoing career development resource series for critics and journalists like the ones you heard here today. So yeah, please feel free to research that. There might be a QR code that pops up for more info. But thank you all for attending. Thank you.